Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are going to take a torch to a very specific, very comfortable illusion that I think most of us live with. It's an assumption that sits in the back of your brain, and you probably don't even realize it's there until someone pokes it.
It's one of those illusions that just feels true because, our daily experience reinforces it.
Right. It's the idea that the world is finished. I mean, we
Yeah.
live in the information age. You can FaceTime a friend in Tokyo. You can stream K-pop in Kansas. You can access the entire Library of Congress while sitting on the bus. So logically, we just assume that globalization has done its job. We assume the map is full.
We think there are no blank spaces left.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And specifically, when it comes to religion, and the Christian gospel in particular, we assume that everyone, everywhere has at least heard of it. If someone isn't a Christian, we assume it's because they've, weighed the options, maybe Googled the theology and swiped left. They've said, no thanks, not for me.
But the documents we're covering today, specifically a heavy-hitting report titled The Unreached, A Global Perspective, argue that this mental map is objectively false.
It effectively shatters that map. The core argument here is that while technology travels at the speed of light, access does not. And that creates this massive, often invisible distinction between being unsaved and being unreached.
And that is the core tension we need to sit with today. The difference between a person who chooses not to drink the water and a person who lives in a village where there are simply no pipes.
So our mission for this deep dive is to map the silence. We're going to unpack this whole concept of the unreached. We're going to look at the 1040 window, which sounds like a tax form, but is actually a crucial geographic concept. And we're going to explore why, in an age of Starlink and iPhones, nearly 40% of the planet is living in what sociologists call blank spaces of access.
And I want to set the table here because this topic can get heavy. The source material really emphasizes that this isn't about guilt, it's about data. It's about clarity. It's a sociological and theological deep dive into who is actually falling through the cracks of history.
So let's start with the definitions, because unreached sounds like insider jargon. If I'm a listener and I have a neighbor, let's call him Dave, who never goes to church, shows zero interest in spirituality, and spends his Sundays washing his car, is Dave unreached?
No. And this is probably the most important distinction to make right out of the gate. Dave is not unreached.
Sorry, Dave, you don't make the cut.
In the missiological sense, Dave is likely considered unsaved or maybe non-believing. But think about Dave's context. He drives past 4 churches on his way to work. If he gets curious, he can buy a Bible at the bookstore or download an app in his native language. He understands the basic cultural vocabulary of Christianity. He has access.
So he has the pipeline, he just hasn't turned on the tap.
Precisely. The source defines unreached very differently. It's not referring to an individual person's spiritual state. It's referring to an entire ethno-linguistic group, a people group.
Okay, hold on. Ethno-linguistic group. So we aren't talking about countries here. We aren't talking about, like, the unreached nation of Germany.
No, because borders are political lines drawn by generals and politicians. They don't always reflect who people actually are. People groups are defined by culture, language, shared history. You can have 50 distinct people groups inside just one country. The definition of an unreached group is a community where there is no indigenous community of believing Christians capable of evangelizing their own people.
That phrase, capable of evangelizing their own people, seems a bit fuzzy. How do you measure capable? Is there a checklist or something?
Researchers actually have a hard metric for this. It's called the 2% threshold.
2%. That sounds incredibly
Okay.
specific. Why not 5%? Why not 0? Is 2% just a number someone pulled out of a hat?
It's not arbitrary. No, it's actually based on sociology, specifically diffusion of innovation theory. Sociologists have found that 2% is a sort of tipping point for any movement.
The critical mass.
Right. Below 2%, a movement is incredibly fragile. If you have a group where only 1% are adherents, they are likely isolated. They're seen as deviants, outsiders, weirdos. They don't have the resources, the leadership, or the social capital to spread the message to the other 98% without outside help. They're just in survival mode.
So below 2%, the group is essentially on life support, dependent on outsiders, missionaries, foreign aid, whatever, just to keep the lights on.
Exactly. But once you cross that 2% threshold, something shifts. The community becomes indigenous. It becomes self-sustaining. It's like a nuclear reaction. It becomes self-fueling. So when we say a group is unreached, we aren't saying there are 0 Christians. We're saying the pipeline is broken. The movement can't flow from neighbor to neighbor yet.
That pipeline analogy is really helpful. It
Yes.
totally changes the way you look at the concept of rejection. If I offer you water and you slap the cup out of my hand, that's rejection. That's Dave. But if you're dying of thirst because the nearest well is 3 valleys over and you don't even have a bucket, that's a lack of access.
That is the tragedy the source is highlighting. It argues that billions of people aren't saying no to Jesus. They are effectively saying who. They simply have no way to hear the name in a context that makes any sense to their life.
The text also creates a subcategory here, just to add some nuance, called the least reached. How is that different from unreached?
This is the gray area. These are groups that might be technically over 2% or very close to it,
Yeah.
but the church is stalled. Maybe it's a nominal church, ancient, traditional, but not vibrant or evangelistic. Or maybe they are heavily persecuted. It's a movement on the rock, but it hasn't tipped yet. It's fragile.
Okay, so we've got the definitions. We know we aren't talking about Dave, but I want to talk about the scale of this.
Mhm.
Because when I hear unreached, my brain goes to National Geographic.
Mm.
I think of a tiny, isolated tribe in the Amazon rainforest that's never seen an airplane. Niche groups.
That is the stereotype. We think remote means unreached, but the data paints a completely different picture.
How so?
We are talking about roughly 40% of the world's population.
40.
40%. That's over 3 billion people. And these aren't just isolated tribes in the jungle. We are talking about massive blocks of humanity. We are talking about the majority of the population in some of the most densely populated, modernizing regions on Earth.
That number is staggering. 40% of the world effectively has no access to the Christian gospel. So where are they? I assume they aren't just scattered randomly like sprinkles on a donut.
No, there is a very specific geography to this silence. If you look at a map, you need to visualize what missiologists call the 1040 window.
I've heard this term thrown around in church circles, but let's drill down. 1040 refers to latitude, right?
Correct. Imagine a band stretching from 10 degrees north of the equator to 40 degrees north.
Okay, I'm visualizing the globe. That covers West Africa.
It starts in West Africa, goes across the Sahara, covers the entire Middle East, sweeps through India, China, and then it ends in Japan.
That is a huge chunk of land.
It's the heart of the Eastern Hemisphere, and it contains the vast majority of those unreached people groups.
So why this specific band? Is it the climate, the terrain? I know there are a lot of deserts and mountains in there.
Geography plays a part. Deserts and mountains do block travel, but the source calls these spiritual strongholds. This region isn't a vacuum. It's the historical home of the world's 3 other major religious systems: Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism.
So the gospel isn't entering an empty room. It's walking into a room that's already fully furnished.
Fully furnished, decorated, and locked from the inside. These aren't just personal beliefs like we have in the West. In the West, you choose your spirituality like you choose a Spotify playlist. I'm a little bit Buddhist, a little bit Christian. In the 1040 window, these are civilizations. Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism. They provide the legal structure, the social calendar, the moral order, the family hierarchy.
So in that context, converting isn't just changing your mind about the theological point.
No, it's defecting. It's viewed as social treason. If you leave the dominant faith in the 1040 window, you are often tearing the very fabric of your family and your society.
And that creates a sort of cultural immune system.
Immunity is a great word for it. These systems have been there for millennia. They have antibodies against foreign ideas. And then on top of that cultural immunity, you have political barriers. Many nations in this window are what the source calls creative access nations.
Which is a polite way of saying missionaries not allowed.
Exactly. You can't just get a visa-labeled preacher. You can't build a church on the corner. This creates invisibility. Because Westerners can't easily go there, we don't see the need, we don't see the people. And because we don't see them, we don't fund work there, and we don't pray for them.
It's a vicious cycle. Out of sight, out of mind, out of the budget.
The source actually notes that a tiny fraction of global mission funding goes to the unreached. Most of it goes to places that are already Christian.
That's the efficiency of the church market, I guess.
Yeah.
It's just easier to go where you're welcomed. But I want to put some faces to this data. The source breaks this down by region, and I found the distinctions really helpful. Let's start with Asia. The text calls this civilizations without witness.
Right. And this really challenges that colonial mindset we mentioned earlier, the idea that unreached means primitive or empty minds waiting to be filled. In Asia, you are dealing with cultures that were writing poetry, building empires, and charting the stars while Europeans were still living in mud huts.
So the barrier isn't a lack of sophistication.
No. The barrier here, according to the source, is largely honor-shame dynamics.
Unpack that for us.
Yeah.
We hear that term, but how does honor-shame actually stop a message from getting through?
Well, think about how the gospel's usually pitched in the West. We are guilt-based individualists. I do something wrong, I feel guilty, I need forgiveness for myself. The message is, Jesus forgives your sins.
Right. Accept Jesus as your personal savior. It's a transaction between me and God.
But in an honor-shame culture like in Japan or parts of India, identity is collective. Your primary duty isn't to yourself, it's to maintain the honor of the group, the family, the ancestors. If you step out and adopt a foreign god, you aren't just making a personal choice. You are bringing shame on your grandmother. You are dishonoring the lineage.
So the gospel is perceived as a threat to the family unit itself. It's seen as selfish.
Exactly. The barrier is deeply relational. It's not just, I don't believe this. It's, I cannot do this to my family.
Let's pivot to Africa, because this one confused me at first. I feel like every time I open a religious news site, I read about how Christianity is exploding in Africa. The global south is the future of the church, right?
And it is. That's true. Sub-Saharan Africa is a massive success story of Christian growth. But the source calls this the African paradox.
The paradox being.
That you can have massive revival in one part of the continent or even one part of a country and total silence in another.
So high volume in the south, mute button in the north.
Roughly, yes. The Sahel region, that strip of land just south of the Sahara, is one of the least reached places on Earth. You have specific tribes like the Fulani or the Somali who are almost 100% Muslim. You can have a country like Nigeria, which is roughly half Christian, but the northern tribes are almost entirely unreached.
That is such a crucial nuance. Just because a country is Christian statistically doesn't mean the village 3 valleys over has ever heard the name of Jesus.
Presence in the nation does not equal access for every tribe. It's like a map that looks solid from a distance, but when you zoom in, it's Swiss cheese. There are holes everywhere.
And finally, let's talk about the Middle East. The source calls this faith under constraint.
The irony here is just thick. This is the cradle, the stories happened here, and yet today, it is the hardest ground.
The text mentions secrecy as survival.
Yes. In the West, faith is loud. We have billboards, we have podcasts. In the Middle East, for the few unreached who do find faith, it is subterranean. The church doesn't have a building. It meets in a living room or a basement or online.
Because the cost is physical safety.
Legal and physical. But the source mentions something fascinating here, that while the access is restricted, the faith that does emerge is often incredibly resilient because of the cost. But statistically, it remains a blank space on the map of access.
Okay, so we've mapped the globe. We've got the 1040 window. We see the barriers. But here is the part of the source material that I think hits closest to home. Literally.
The diaspora.
The source argues that mission is no longer synonymous with overseas travel. And this is where the modern world throws a huge curveball at that 1040 map.
It's the Great Migration. We are seeing unprecedented movement of people. Wars, economics, education people are moving from the unreached world into the reached world.
So you have a Kurdish family moving to Nashville. You have a Pashtun student moving to London.
Right. And the lazy assumption, the one we started with, is, well, I moved to London, problem solved. They are reached.
I mean, logically, if you live in London, you can walk into a church. You have access to the pipeline.
That is the trap of proximity. The source makes a brilliant point here. Physical proximity does not equal spiritual access.
How is that possible? If you're next door, you're next door.
Just think about the cultural bubble. You can move to a new city but live entirely within your own diaspora community. You eat at restaurants owned by your people, you work with your people, you speak your mother tongue at home, and with the internet, you are consuming media from back home.
So you could physically sleep in Brooklyn, but culturally and spiritually, you are still living in Yemen.
Exactly. You can live in an apartment building next door to a Christian for 10 years, say hello in the hallway, and never have a single meaningful conversation about faith. The linguistic and cultural barrier is still there. It's just invisible.
That's heavy. It means unreached isn't just a place over there. It's a reality right here.
And the source warns that the digital frontier plays into this. We think the internet connects us, but algorithms often just reinforce our bubbles. A person from an unreached group is likely seeing content that reinforces their existing worldview, not challenges it.
So we've defined the terms. We've toured the world. We've looked at our own neighborhoods. But I want to land on the so what. The source spends a good amount of time on the theology of this. Why does this matter?
It goes back to what they call the Romans 10 logic. The Apostle Paul asks this chain of questions. How can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard?
It's a logic of necessity. Hearing precedes believing. You can't believe in something you don't know exists.
Right. The source argues that this silence, this lack of access, is not a problem of divine absence. God isn't hiding from the 1040 window. It's a problem of historical silence.
Meaning the mailman didn't deliver the letter.
Exactly. The message has been bottlenecked. The text is very clear. This is a human responsibility. It argues that invisibility is the greatest barrier. We don't prioritize what we don't see.
And there's a moral weight to that.
There is. The source suggests that in an age of data, ignorance is no longer a valid excuse. We have the maps, we have the stats, we know where the silence is. The text says once you know about the unreached, indifference is no longer an option.
That hits hard. Indifference is not an option. So let's talk about what is an option, because frankly, hearing 40% of the world is unreached is paralyzing. It feels too big to fix. If I'm just a regular person with a regular job, what am I supposed to do with that?
And the source explicitly says, do not try to fix it alone. It warns against the hero complex, and it warns against guilt tripping. Guilt is a terrible fuel for long-term action. It burns hot and fast, and then you just burn out.
So what does it propose instead?
It proposes strategic participation. And it starts with a very simple, almost analog habit, creating a personal, unreached map.
I love this idea. It sounds like a homework assignment, but it's actually quite profound.
It is. The idea is to stop praying for the world generally. God bless the world is too abstract. It means nothing. Instead, you identify specific people groups, not just countries. Don't just say India. Say the Bhojpuri people of India.
Learn their names.
Learn their names. Google them. Find out what they eat, what they believe, what their barriers are. Print out a map and circle where they live.
It breaks the abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, when you see a headline about a flood in Pakistan, it's not just news. It's, oh, that's where the Pashtun people are. I've been thinking about them. I know who lives there.
Exactly. It builds what the source calls informed compassion. You can't care about a statistic. You can only care about people.
And the second takeaway was prayer as strategy.
Yeah. In many circles, prayer is the thing you do before the work or the thing you do when you can't do anything else. Well, all we can do is pray. The source reframes prayer as the work itself.
It calls it strategic participation.
Right. It suggests a weekly rhythm. Pick one region or one people group per week. Learn about their specific barrier. Is it legal restriction? Pray for the laws to change. Is it lack of a Bible translation? Pray for linguists. Is it that honor-shame dynamic? Pray for families to find ways to accept the message together. It transforms prayer from a vague wish into a targeted laser.
And finally, the source emphasizes mobilization without guilt.
This is so crucial. The text frames this as joyful participation. It's about aligning your life with reality. The reality is that God is moving among nations. Even in the 1040 window, things are happening, and we get to be part of it.
It's not about doing everything. It's about doing something strategic.
Right. Maybe your role isn't to move to Tibet. Maybe your role is to welcome the Tibetan family that just moved into your neighborhood. It's about ending the silence in your own sphere of influence.
So let's bring it all together. The world is not fully mapped spiritually. There are massive blank spaces of access where the pipeline hasn't reached. These aren't just people who said no. They're people who haven't had a chance to say yes.
And while the barriers are real geography, culture, religion, politics, the biggest barrier might just be our own lack of awareness.
The invisibility.
We can't care about what we don't see.
The source leaves us with some really provocative questions to chew on. And I think this is where we need to land. The text asks, which peoples never appear in your prayers?
And which regions exist for you only as headlines, never as human communities?
That's the challenge. To shift our mental map. To see the world not just as markets or vacation spots or political hot zones, but as a collection of families waiting for that pipeline to open.
The source calls it having a sanctified imagination, seeing the faces behind the statistics, because once you see them, you can't really unsee them.
And that's where we'll leave it. We hope this deep dive has helped you fill in some of the blank spaces on your own mental map. Thanks for listening.